He lived 3 lives and he gets to walk away unscathed.
And when I touched his forehead, it was ice cold, and there's blood coming out of his eyes and his nose and his ears.
I'm both ashamed and disgusted that my irresponsible choices took away such a special life from those who love him dearly.
Police suspect that a local woman was under the influence of drugs when she caused a fatal traffic accident that claimed the life of her niece. Sophia Sandoval died after being rushed to UMC following the crash. Now, the girl's aunt is facing felony charges. She appeared before a local judge. 63-year-old Christina Sorensen has been charged with DUI, resulting in death, reckless driving, and child endangerment. Her bail was set at $100,000. Sorensen stood quietly before the judge during the hearing.
The court did review the allegation and find probable cause.
The 63-year-old, who has been in custody since her arrest, was driving a gray Corvette, according to police. Sorensen was attempting to turn left on a red light at the intersection of Simmons and Ann when a black Jeep coming from the opposite direction crashed into the side of her car, killing her passenger, Sophia Sandoval.
It was chaotic.
Witness Rosalind Agnew recounted how strangers did everything they could to save the child's life.
Standers coming from everywhere trying to pull her, get her out of the car, get the shrapnel, and I saw them administering CPR on her, unfortunately.
People were trying out here.
Oh, God. People come from everywhere.
According to her arrest report, Sorensen appeared emotionless and told officers she thought her light was green, adding that it happened so fast. She then failed field sobriety tests, losing her balance and nearly falling to her left side. While blood test results are still pending, her attorney suggested that her behavior could have been due to the effects of prescribed medications.
There's no reason to believe that this could not be a simple, horrible traffic accident.
Her attorney also informed the court that Sorensen suffers from significant medical issues.
So she hasn't slept for 3 days, and we want to make sure that she's getting the right medical care. If she doesn't have that BPAP, then she could very well die in her sleep. Okay? She has Crohn's disease, she has diabetes, she has all these different things.
At the intersection of Simmons and Ann, a teddy bear and candles now mark the site of the crash. Residents in the area have expressed concerns, saying drivers are often far too impatient.
We can do something about it. I just hope we can do something about it, because enough is enough. We just have to take other people into consideration.
Agnew shared that driving by the intersection will always be difficult for her.
It was very scary. It was very sad, I have a son, he's 6. So yeah, that's not something I would ever want to experience.
If Sorensen is released on bail, she will be subject to high-level monitoring and not be permitted to drive a vehicle. A truck driver who killed 3 people has received the maximum penalty. The driver was on the wrong side of the road for nearly 30 seconds when he collided with a group of motorcyclists in March near Laughlin. He will now spend at least 4 years in prison. 29-year-old Claude Rafiki apologized for causing the deaths of 3 people as he awaited his sentencing.
The defendant was driving a nuclear bomb on the road.
The crash involved an 18-wheeler weaving over the center line near Laughlin.
March 23rd, 2024 is the day our families' lives were shattered and our hearts were broken.
That day, Rafiki drove on the wrong side of the road for over 20 seconds, colliding with a group of unsuspecting motorcyclists as they approached a corner. Jeremy Gibbo, Owen Hart, and Athena Taylor did not survive the crash.
He lived 3 lives and he gets to walk away unscathed. I hope this weighs on his shoulders every single day of his miserable life.
When he passed was so sudden, there wasn't any time to say goodbye.
Hart and Taylor were recently engaged, and his parents, who were also on the ride, witnessed their son's death.
I feel guilty for leaving my son on the side of the road. On the scene of the crime, while it was being investigated. It all feels so wrong and unnatural.
Rafiki's Michigan state driving record shows that his medical certification, the clearance required to drive the truck, expired the day after the crash that killed 3 people. The record does not list any medical restrictions, but prosecutors revealed that Rafiki was taking medication for epilepsy. They also believe he falsified his logbooks to make it appear as though he was alternating with another driver when, in fact, he was driving alone the entire time.
Even though he's a hardworking man, he's trying to do this, but it's at the expense of everyone else's safety.
3 families wonder how their son, daughter, and father would have lived their lives if Rafiki had not driven the wrong way.
I get stuck imagining how frightened they were if they suffered. A million questions and what ifs.
Rafiki and the families reached a plea agreement that would sentence him to 4 to 10 years in prison, a penalty the judge accepted. State police initially suspected that Rafiki was impaired, but tests later showed that he had nothing in his system. The exact reason why he drove the wrong way may never be known. A 29-year sentence for killing a deputy is meant to bring closure, but try telling that to the father of a 23-year-old who was run down and killed by a drunk driver.
And when I touched his forehead, it was ice cold. And there's blood coming out of his eyes and his nose and his ears. I said, "Christopher, get up." I fell to the floor. And I said, "God, no, take me, not him."
These are the final moments of his son's life before a drunk driver, Cassandra Smith, veered across the highway and slammed into his patrol car, throwing him into the air. Smith has just learned how long she will spend in prison. The state requested a 30-year sentence, while the defense asked for 12 years.
Count 3, the vehicular homicide. Ms. Smith, as it relates to count 3, the jury having found you guilty, I will adjudicate you guilty of that offense. Sentence you to 15 years in the Department of Corrections. As to count 1, DUI manslaughter, violation of Florida Statute 316.193 sub 3. At this time, the court will adjudicate you guilty of that offense. Sentence you to 14 years in the Department of Corrections, consecutive to count 3.
Just before learning her fate, Cassandra Smith apologized for her crime for the first time.
Literally anything to go back to before the night of November 22nd, 2022, to bring Christopher back to the arms of his loved ones and make these families whole again. But unfortunately, life doesn't work like that, and the only way through it is forward, ideally with improvements along the way. I hate that there is such pain and anguish because of this tragedy, the extreme distress felt by all about the situation. The image of him laying there prostrate, looking so serene, will forever be seared on my mind and in my soul, inescapable even in dreamland. This terrible accident has taught me the true meaning of heartache. It's overwhelming, unrelenting, and inescapable torture, felt palpably throughout my whole body, like knives literally tearing into my flesh. This uncontrollable physical pain manifested by the thought of the night and the impact it has had on Christopher's loved ones is excruciating. I wouldn't wish this feeling on my worst enemy.
Charlotte County Sheriff Bill Prummel issued a statement on the sentencing saying, "With today's sentencing, Deputy Taylor's families, both blood and blue, can take another step forward in finding closure. Seeing justice served is a big part of that, and although it won't bring Chris back to us, it at least brings a bit of relief." He also addressed Cassandra Smith directly. "I want to encourage you to use these 29 years to grow as a person. Let this terrible choice you made serve as a catalyst to turn your life around, for you have forever changed the life of the Taylor family." Sheriff Prummel mentioned the next step, to honor Deputy Taylor's sacrifice more permanently. Progress is being made on a bill sponsored by Representative Roach to rename the Peace River Bridge in Chris's memory. The bill has already started the approval process, and the sheriff promised to update everyone once it is finalized so they can celebrate Chris's legacy together. Deputy Taylor's father spoke powerfully in court, saying, "You killed me when you killed my son." Ryan Morales, the man found responsible for the deaths of 6 family members in a tragic October 2013 crash in Lodi, was sentenced in court. Morales wept as he read from a written statement during the proceedings. He was found guilty of causing the crash on Ham Avenue in Lodi, where his blood alcohol level was more than twice the legal limit, and his vehicle was reportedly traveling at speeds over 90 miles per hour at the time of impact. Officials noted the impact was so severe that the speedometer needle was stuck at 100 miles per hour. Among the victims were Luis and Viviana Miranda, a husband and his pregnant wife. The only survivor, Eden Miranda, has since been adopted by his godparents and moved out of state. Investigators have credited Eden's resilience with giving them the strength to continue pursuing the case. During the sentencing, a woman who identified herself as Morales' aunt pleaded for mercy, stating that the crash was a tragic mistake and that Morales would never intentionally harm anyone.
Disagree. We went to the house and found 11 bottles of vodka there, and we know that that wasn't all done in one day.
Michael Rasmussen, Deputy District Attorney in San Joaquin County, had this to say.
It is by far the most horrific vehicular or manslaughter case this county has ever seen. The list of victims in this case are incredible. More than just Luis, Viviana, Irving, Stephanie, Jose, the fetus, and Eden, and the Romero family. You saw the testimony of the witnesses that came in here. Dr. Primack, a cardiologist. You saw how it affected him. All the other witnesses, they were traumatized by this. The town of Lodi is still recovering from this. This is one of the most horrific things that I've ever seen in my life, and hopefully I never see another thing even close to this. There are no winners in this. Everyone loses. The city of Lodi, the Miranda family, the Morales family.
Rasmussen requested the maximum sentence possible, arguing that Morales could not make sound decisions and posed a continued threat to public safety. During the sentencing, Rasmussen repeatedly referenced Morales' prior DUI conviction, underscoring the severity of his actions and the risk he presents to the community.
You see through the probation officer's report, Mr. Morales hasn't made the right decision in his life. He is a threat to the community. I don't think he's going to go out and pick up a and start shooting people, but he can't make the right decision. He needs to be behind bars. He needs to be behind bars for the rest of his life. And we're asking that you run all the first 6 counts consecutive, and then we ask for the GBI and DUI penalties as it stands to Eden. And with that, Your Honor, we'd submit it.
Mr. Morales' total term of imprisonment shall be 98 years to life in the state prison.
I lost my daughter nearly 6 years ago to a drunk driver. And every one of these touches me. I feel every one of these. I feel the pain of their victims, of their friends, of what it does for them.
Barbara Little, a Mothers Against Drunk Driving representative, attended the sentencing.
Now that everything's come to an end and he suddenly realizes that he's not going to get away with this, all of a sudden there's some I'm sorry's. Yeah, you're sorry you got caught, you're sorry this happened, but you weren't sorry that day when you're drinking, you weren't sorry about how you were driving and whose lives were in effect. There was a school right there. Who knows how many people could have been lost that day?
What are we all going to learn from this case? In this case, 6 people. How many people, what can we do to save other lives? This is the important thing we have to learn so that they did not die for nothing.
Ryan Morales was sentenced to 30 years to life in prison. Back in December, 50-year-old retired Sterling Heights Police Sergeant Darrell Brown was walking in downtown Detroit with a relative when he was struck and killed by a drunk driver who then fled the scene. 6 months later, the driver was sentenced for the deadly crash. Although the driver may only serve 3.5 years in jail, Brown's family expressed that they were okay with the sentence, but wanted the court to understand the profound impact of their loss. They emphasized that the future has been irreparably altered. Children are now without a father, and a wife is now a widow.
We have lost the future together and all its potential.
The families of crime victims often find it nearly impossible to put into words the impact of their loved one's death, but they still try to convey their pain and loss. Darrell Brown's family did just that, sharing the profound effect his death has had on their lives.
New Year's and Easter. He has missed 2 family vacations that I had to cancel because I couldn't bear to take them without him.
Jennifer and Darrell Brown were married for over 2 decades. Darrell was a Sterling Heights police officer, while Jennifer was a circuit court judge. She spoke with the authority of both a judge and a grieving wife, expressing the depth of her loss and the impact on their family.
I hope that everyone in this room and anyone that we can touch can learn from this horrible tragedy, and hopefully no one else will make the same mistake.
The driver pleaded guilty to driving drunk and causing Brown's death.
Both ashamed and disgusted that my irresponsible choices took away such a special life from those who love him dearly.
Brown, who left behind 2 children, was remembered by his family as a devoted father and husband whose loss has left an immeasurable void in their lives.
All the important opportunities to give wise fatherly advice. He will miss all the major and minor events in their life. He will miss their happiness, and he will miss their sorrows.
During the sentencing, the judge emphasized that she understood the pain felt by both families involved in this tragedy. She acknowledged that the Pirovich family is also suffering. Sergeant Darrell Brown dedicated over 26 years to serving the city of Sterling Heights, spending more than half his life in service before retiring in 2017. The case of a deadly DUI crash in Letcher County that claimed the lives of 2 Pike County women has finally been closed. In Letcher Circuit Court, 39-year-old Travis Hilbert of Wise County, Virginia, was sentenced to 16 years in prison for the deaths of 61-year-old Barbara Newsom of Pikeville and 90-year-old Kathleen Tackett of Belcher. The 2 women were killed in a crash near Jenkins in May 2018 when Hilbert lost control of his vehicle and crossed into the path of the car they were in. Newsom died while en route to the hospital, and Tackett passed away several days later. Hilbert had been charged with first-degree assault, 2 counts of manslaughter, and other charges, including DUI. As part of a plea agreement, Hilbert entered an Alford plea in January to amend charges of reckless homicide in connection with the deaths of the 2 women, a charge of second-degree assault for injuries suffered by another passenger, and a DUI charge. During his sentencing, he received 5 years in prison for each reckless homicide charge, 5 years for the second-degree assault charge, 1 year for a criminal mischief charge, and 1 week for the DUI charge, resulting in a total sentence of 16 years in prison. Letcher Commonwealth's attorney Addison Banks stated that the families of Newsom and Tackett agreed with the plea deal.
Every time you see anything the color orange, a pumpkin, a carrot, a construction cone, even the jumpsuit you wear, anytime you see anything whatsoever that is orange, I hope you think about the life your choice took for Barbara Newsom, and that orange was my mother's favorite color.
Banks noted that it would have been challenging to secure a conviction for Hilbert on the first-degree assault charge due to the specific factors of the case. He also emphasized that, regardless of the outcome, there are no winners in this situation.
Well, now that it's over, I'm hoping that the victims will be able to have some closure, and certainly the driver of the automobile, because she has to deal with it every day of her life. There's never going to be a good outcome when there's a fatality of any type involved. And in vehicular homicides, you start out, it's a loser any way you look at it. The family that had their loved one don't get over it. The person that caused the fatality and their family doesn't get over it. So the best you can try to do is to get a little closure for everybody so they can start moving on with their life. There's nobody that can say you ever are a winner when you have a tragedy like this. And when you have multiple deaths, that makes it much worse than just a single death. We got 16 years at 20%. So to me, that was a fair trade-off to not put the family through a trial. The surviving victim, no one knows the amount of grief that she was carrying, the weight of all of that on her. And I can't see any good that would have come of forcing her to get on the stand and relive yet once more something that she probably thinks about every spare moment of the day.
Hilbert will be eligible for parole after serving just over 3 years. He has been in the Letcher County Jail since the crash in May 2018 and will remain there until his parole eligibility. On October 18, 2018, in Jacksonville, Zykeria Robinson fell asleep one night but never woke up. She was under the horrific care of her mother, Michelle Canamore, and her boyfriend, Jonta Harris. Some atrocities are so disturbing that they become unbearable, like confronting a murderous mother in court.
Now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 115. What do we see there, sir?
These are pamphlet, I call pamphlet, meaning they look like small puncture wounds that have clots in them. So, and they seem to be in a semicircular pattern too, and I thought this maybe look like bite marks that seem to be more recent than the others.
Yes, sir. The difference in coloration of each of these injuries we're looking at, is that why you're opining that these injuries were over different time periods?
Yes.
I'm now showing you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 116. What do we see there, sir? Hey, take your time.
I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
It's just coming back. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir. Take your time.
So, we thought it was just old wood saying like this.
Okay. Would this be something that would, in common term vote, be to her left side, sir?
Yes.
State 7.
The kitchen.
States 8.
The kitchen.
States 9.
The stove. The microwave and the kitchen.
States 14. What would be on the right-hand side of that hallway?
On the right-hand side would be a closet. In the girls' bathroom.
And on the left-hand side, what's on that side of the hallway?
It's our parents' bedroom and a daughter's bedroom.
Is this the bathroom in States 15?
Yes, ma'am.
States 19, whose room are we looking into?
Zacarias.
States 20?
Zacarias.
Is there anything in that room?
No.
States 21?
Zacarias' room.
States 22?
Anaya's room.
States 23?
That's Anaya Zacarias' bed.
So at some times, did they sleep in that room, both of them?
Sometimes.
States 25, whose room is this?
Mine.
States 26?
My bed.
And States 32?
My bathroom.
Now, Ms. Canamore, when you and your girls moved into that apartment, did your sister also move in?
She did.
When was that?
May of 2018.
What room did she stay in when she first moved in?
Zacarias.
Was your sister responsible for anything while she was living in your home?
Taking care of our girls.
Okay, were you working at the time?
Yes, ma'am.
Let's talk about your girls. How many children did you have?
2.
When did you have your children?
I had Anaya July 24, 2012, and I had Zacarias September 9, 2013.
Would you call Anaya Naya for short?
Yes, ma'am.
And would you call Zykeria Kiri for short?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Zykeria have any sort of health issues when she was born?
No, not that I know of. All I know is that she was lactose intolerant and she's allergic to bananas.
Okay. When she was did they say she was anemic?
Yes, they did.
Is that something she grew out of?
Yes, ma'am.
And did they also say she had a misshapen head?
She did.
Did she have any issues with learning?
She was slower than the rest of the kids.
Okay. Did you work with her at home before you put her in school?
I did not.
Okay. Did you work with Anaya before you put her in school?
I did.
Okay. For the most part, was Zykeria an overall normal kid?
She was.
At the time that they were born, were you dating their father, Zafir Robinson?
I was.
Did the two of you eventually part ways?
6 years later, yes.
But did you guys continue to maintain some sort of agreement with the children?
We did.
In 2018, did you start dating someone else?
I did.
Who was that?
Jonta Harris.
Ms. Canamore, take your time on this, but can you please look around the courtroom and tell me if you see Jonte Harris here today?
Yes.
Can you tell me what side of the courtroom he's seated on and an article of clothing that he's wearing?
He's on the left side with a white shirt on.
Your Honor, may the record reflect that the witness has positively identified Jonte Harris.
The record shows so.
When did the two of you first meet?
In high school.
Would you hang out in high school?
No.
Did you guys run in the same circles in high school?
No.
Did the two of you reconnect later in life?
We did.
When was that?
January of 2018.
Where did the two of you see each other again?
Jonte came into my job.
What job were you working at?
7-Eleven off Livingston Lane.
Did the two of you exchange contact information?
He gave me his Instagram.
From there, did the two of you begin an intimate relationship?
We did.
At first, were things serious between the two of you?
No.
Did they later become serious?
Yes, ma'am.
When was that?
February.
February? Did you introduce him to your children?
I did.
Prior to that, did he know that you had kids?
No.
Did he eventually move in with you?
Yes, ma'am.
When?
June 2018.
And why did he move in with you?
Him and his sister wasn't getting along.
So you needed a place to live?
Yes, ma'am.
And June of 2018, you were at the Oak Tree Apartments?
Yes, I was.
When he first moved in, who was living in apartment 204?
Me, Zachariah, Anaya, and my sister.
Okay. Did your children eventually go to visit with their father?
Yes, ma'am.
When was that?
Late June, early July.
Okay. So there was a period of time where it was just you, Jonte, and your sister.
Yes, ma'am.
How was the relationship between you and Jonte in the beginning?
Jury boards always diligently perform their duties. In sensitive cases, they take extra care to deliver a fair verdict.
The state of Florida versus Jonte Harris. Verdict is to count 1, first-degree murder. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder as charged in the indictment. Verdict is to count 2, aggravated manslaughter of a child. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of aggravated manslaughter of a child as charged in the information. Verdict is to count 3, aggravated abuse. We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of aggravated abuse as charged in the indictment. So say we all, done at Jacksonville, Duval County, Florida, Jacqueline Boss, foreperson, February 8th, 2024.
Would the defense like the jury poll?
Yes, you are.
Madam Clerk, if you would poll the jury.
Ms. Boss, were these your verdicts?
Yes.
Ms. Charles, were these your verdicts?
Yes.
Mr. Bowie, were these your verdicts?
Yes.
Ms. Butner, were these your verdicts? Ms. McKenzie, were these your verdicts? Ms. Populous, were these your verdicts?
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Members of the jury, I wish to thank you for your time and consideration of the case, and I wish to advise you of the privilege enjoyed by jurors. No juror can ever be required to discuss what occurred in the jury room except by court order. For many centuries, we have relied on juries for consideration of difficult cases. We have recognized for that period of time that the jury's votes and discussions and deliberations should remain a private affair for as long as they wish it. And therefore, the law gives you that unique privilege not to speak about your work. Up to now, I've told you that you can talk about the case. That admonition is now gone. I'm about to discharge you from your jury service, and you can feel free to talk about the case or not talk about the case. It will be completely up to you. You leave here with my thanks for giving us 4 days of your lives away from, of your time away from your lives and your jobs and your families to be down here. I told your fellow jurors, the alternate jurors, this when they were leaving a couple hours ago, that we ask a lot of jurors when you come down here. You never know, you get that summons and you come down to fulfill this extremely important civic duty, and you never know what awaits you. Are you here for a couple of hours, then get to go home? Or are you going to sit on a trial involving a DUI or somebody breaking a window somewhere, something like that? or a case such as this. You just don't know. And again, we ask a lot of you. I've watched all of you this week. This has been an emotional week for you, but you never wavered in terms of your attention and your seriousness and purpose that you paid to the case, and you did what I expected that you would do, which is to fulfill your duty in a very solemn and appropriate manner. And I thank you very much for that, and as does everyone here in the courthouse. But with that, you're free to go. We will escort you to your vehicles. Thank you very much. You'll get a letter from me in the next week or two with an email and a phone number. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Okay, Mr. Harris, if you'll welcome to the, well, you can stay right there, actually, the podium's not there. So, Mr. Harris, the jury having found you guilty of the 3 charges in the indictment, the court revokes any bond previously set, remands you to the custody of the sheriff to await sentencing. Obviously, there's only 1 sentence as to count 1. But as to all of the charges, Mr. Harris is entitled to a PSI. Are you requesting one?
Yes, sir.
All right. We'll order a pre-sentence investigation report to be ordered. As we know, that takes about 4 weeks. So I would propose that we pass the case to 4 weeks from this coming Monday, which would be March the 11th, for sentencing to be set that week. Everybody good?
Your Honor, I will just need to speak with the victim's family.
Okay. We'll go ahead and tentatively set it for that week, and then if there's a problem, parties let me know. March the 11th for sentencing to be set. Any further business to come before the court on Mr. Harris's case today?
No, Your Honor.
Nothing from the feds, Your Honor.
Thank you. We are in recess.
Thank you.
Sir, I read this way.
Is the time that Michelle Canamore will have to suffer. She will have to live in this pain as she has done for the last 5 years. She will have to learn to love herself and learn how she is going to make up for the loss of Zykeria. The state would just recommend that she serve those 25 years, Your Honor.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Any legal reason why sentencing is not now revoked?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Okay, we'll have to come forward to that. Ms. Canmore, I don't know, obviously, what you may have expected today. I don't know if you expected some sort of absolution for your actions in the case. I don't necessarily get that from what you said. I don't know if you want to hear things that will assuage your guilt. Again, I don't necessarily hear that from what you said today. The state is 100% right. Everything Ms. Anderson said is spot on. You got a choice to make, and you made it. And as a result, your daughter is. And I am obviously not unsympathetic to, because we see it all the time. We see it in society, of course, and we see it here in court, where single moms are faced with difficult choices on a daily basis. Heart-wrenching, difficult choices to do things to put food on their table for their children and a roof over their heads. That's not what occurred here. And let's make no mistake about it, that is not what occurred here. You didn't eat that guy. You wouldn't put food on the table and a roof over your head. You were doing that. You were trying to satisfy some baser needs or wants that had absolutely nothing to do with the safety of your children.
And that makes this all the more excusable. Now, one point I slight, and I don't quibble with anything Ms. Anderson said, except the sentence I'm going to give you is not meant to make you suffer. But I'll tell you what it is in no small part meant to do. You will be away from society, and part of the hope is that you won't be around children, because you've lost that right. I want to make it clear that I have considered everything. Your attorney did an excellent job for you. And he presented some significant mitigation on your behalf. And I have no doubt that your remorse and your grief is real. But that is not enough to overcome the significant actions that you undertook and inactions that you undertook in this case. That again led in no small part to that precious little girl. And I do not quibble with anything that anybody said. You have, it appears, some wonderful people in your family and friends who love you and care about you. But I just want to make one point on that. Words have meaning. You are not a good mother. Ms. Canmore, based on your plea of guilty in this case to the first-degree felony of aggravated manslaughter, the court adjudicates you guilty of that offense, sends you to 30 years in the Florida State Prison with credit for, Madam Clerk,
5 years, 4 months, and 25 days.
that amount of credit time. You are ordered to pay $518 in court costs, which includes a $100 cost of prosecution fee, a $150 regional conflict counsel fee, the state seeking any restitution in the case.
No, Your Honor.
Anything else in the state?
No, Your Honor.
That's clear. Ms. Canmore, you have 30 days to appeal the sentence if you believe it to be unlawful. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be appointed for you, and the court will appoint the officer of the public defender to represent you on appeal. Thank you for the hearing in this case. Court is in recess for 5 minutes.
This case revolves around Dean Cummings. In 2020, in Sandoval County, Dean Cummings ended the life of 47-year-old Guillermo Arreola. Dean's involvement in the murder was uncovered during the police investigation, leading to charges being filed against him. The truth inevitably comes to light. Throughout the trial, the prosecution consistently strives to reveal the criminal's true identity.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your time and attention this morning. I know it's a long morning, and now that you ate lunch, hopefully we won't put you to sleep. So, thank you, though, for being honest in your answers so that we can pick the most fair and impartial jury for this trial. This is a criminal trial, as you heard, commenced against the state of New Mexico against Dean Cummings. And I'm going to play for you a phone call from a 911 operator to the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office dispatch that was made on February 29th of 2020. Ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, or you can guess from Vaudier, this case isn't about who did it or how it was done. This case, the facts for you to decide are whether or not this homicide was committed in self-defense or whether it was committed with or without sufficient provocation. A second-degree murder is a homicide that was committed without having been sufficiently provoked, whereas a voluntary manslaughter is a homicide committed after having been sufficiently provoked. And the judge is going to give you the definitions to all of these things and what that law means. This case, ladies and gentlemen, is a case about reasonableness. And you, ladies and gentlemen, are the finders of the facts. The state has the burden of proof of showing that Dean Cummings, the defendant in this case, committed this homicide beyond a reasonable doubt. And the state will also show that the defendant, Mr. Cummings, also committed the crime of tampering with evidence. And that is because he washed his face, his hands, and changed his clothing after committing that homicide. And the state will also show that he committed the crime of concealing identity, because when law enforcement came and interacted with him, he didn't give his identity to them. The evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that on
Ms. Walker,
February...
Ms. Walker, IT person is searching on it.
That's okay, I'll just proceed. It's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is going to show that on February 29th of 2020, at Guillermo Adiola's ranch, which is way out past Cabazon Peak, in the far remote area of Sandoval County, New Mexico, a ranch that is so remote that there is no cell phone service out there. And a ranch that is so remote that law enforcement had to use GPS coordinates on the search warrants. The evidence is going to show that the defendant, Guillermo Adiola, in his trailer, and the evidence will show that Mr. Adiola had been contemplating selling this ranch to Dean Cummings. He had his realtor, Christine Landers, draft up a real estate contract to sell this property to Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings had time to contemplate the purchase of this property and had not yet signed the real estate contract at the time of the homicide. On February 29th, 2020, Guillermo Adiola drove out to his ranch out in Sandoval County to meet with Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings shot Mr. Adiola with a Sig Sauer AR-15. This rifle had a 30-round magazine and a scope on it. Mr. Adiola was 47 years old at the time of his death, and he was shot 2 times that day. He was shot once in the head and once in the chest. Law enforcement came and processed the scene, and they recovered 10 casings, spent casings, from that bedroom where he was shot. In Mr. Adiola's right hand was a can of mace, and that can of mace was facing Mr. Adiola, not outwards towards any attacker, but facing him and his body. You will be asked to determine whether the reasonableness of Mr. Cummings' actions when he committed this homicide. Were his actions reasonable when he killed Mr. Adiola with an AR-15? Initially, when law enforcement went, Mr. Cummings refused to identify himself when the deputies made contact with him. And Mr. Cummings told the Sandoval County Sheriff's deputies that he killed Mr. Adiola in self-defense because he was sprayed with a neurological agent, presumably the mace. Mr. Cummings told deputies that he washed himself off to get rid of the neurological agent and that he changed his clothing. Now let's talk about the evidence that's going to be presented to you over the next week, week and a half. You're going to hear testimony from Christine Landers. Ms. Landers is going to tell you that she drafted that real estate contract for Mr. Adiola to sell the land to Mr. Cummings. She's going to tell you that she met Mr. Cummings and Mr. Adiola about a month before the homicide to go over this real estate contract. She's going to tell you that Mr. Cummings had his 5th will parked on the ranch property. And you're also going to hear testimony from David McCullough. Mr. McCullough will tell you that on February 29th, 2020, which was a leap day, he was out riding his ATV out in the middle of the desert at Cabazon Peak, and he came upon Mr. Cummings. Mr. Cummings spoke with him and conversed with him for about an hour, and then Mr. Cummings asked him to come with him to witness the body. Mr. Cummings told Mr. McCullough that he killed the man in self-defense and he wanted him to witness the body. Mr. McCullough followed Mr. Cummings back to the ranch, and Mr. McCullough will tell you that he had medical training, so he believed he could render aid to anybody who was injured. So that's why he went back to the trailer, to the ranch, to see if he could render aid. Mr. McCullough will tell you that Mr. Adiola was past the point of aid being rendered. The defendant, Dean Cummings, told Mr. McCullough that he had used the in the back of his truck to kill Mr. Adiola. Mr. McCullough will tell you that he saw the rifle in the back of Mr. Cummings' truck, and then he proceeded to drive to an area where he could get cell phone service. Mr. Cummings stayed back at the ranch while Mr. McCullough drove out to get cell phone service. The area was so remote that it took him several times to get in touch with a 911 dispatch. And you'll hear those calls, and they continue to be dropped. He made about 4 calls to 911. You'll hear those calls. Mr. McCullough waited for law enforcement, and then he led them to the remote area where the ranch was located. After Mr. McCullough called law enforcement, then Mr. Cummings also called law enforcement. You're going to hear testimony from several Sandoval County Sheriff's deputies. You're going to hear testimony from Deputy Hayden Walker. He was one of the initial responding officers that responded on February 29th, 2020. You'll hear that he met Mr. McCullough, and Mr. McCullough led him into the ranch. And you'll hear that Mr. Cummings told him he killed Mr. Adiola in self-defense because he was sprayed with a neurological agent. Deputy Walker placed Mr. Cummings in the back of his patrol car while they conducted the investigation. And Mr. Cummings tells the deputies that he placed the rifle on the porch and that he had the magazine, he took the magazine out and they were both laying on the porch for them. Mr. Cummings tells Deputy Walker that he washed his face off and his hands and changed his clothing. You'll also hear testimony from Deputy Jonathan Crispin, and he also responded to the scene with Deputy Walker. They secured the scene. They made contact with Mr. McCullough. He collected some witness statements while he was there on scene. And then they secured the perimeter. They went into the trailer to make sure that there was nobody else that was injured. And then they held the scene until the remainder of law enforcement can come. You're going to hear testimony from Sergeant Thomas Griffin, another officer with the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office. And he was the on-scene sergeant out there at the ranch. He arrived with Deputy Gutierrez, and he was present when Mr. Cummings was evaluated by emergency medical services. Mr. Cummings told Sergeant Griffin that the clothing he was wearing at the time of the homicide was in the back of his truck. So Deputy Griffin collects those clothing, and he's going to tell you that the clothing was indeed wet, as if Mr. Cummings had washed himself off. Sergeant Griffin also assisted with the towing of the vehicles from that ranch. They towed the vehicle of Guillermo Adiola. They towed the vehicle of Mr. Cummings, his truck, as well as the fifth wheel. Sergeant Griffin also collected the evidence. So in this homicide, the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office called the New Mexico State Police, and they come out and they assist with the crime scene. So he collected the evidence from the New Mexico State Police that was collected from the scene that day, and he's the one who tags it into evidence. You'll also hear testimony from Lieutenant Frank Tomlinson, our case agent here. He was assigned this investigation, and he's the one who was in charge of making sure everything got done. Lieutenant Tomlinson assisted with the investigation while working out of the Sandoval County Sheriff's Office, which is right here in the courthouse, while Thomas Griffin was the one at the ranch. Because there was no cell phone service, they had to play telephone tag, if you will, to get sure the warrant's done. He wrote several warrants and he interviewed several witnesses, and you're going to hear about all of that, part of the investigation. He also transported the evidence. As I stated, the New Mexico State Police assisted with this investigation by processing the scene, and you're going to hear testimony from Carlos Herrera, the New Mexico State Police case agent. He was the criminalistics agent, so he was the one in charge of making sure all of the evidence is documented and collected. New Mexico State Police arrived at the ranch after the warrants were granted so that they collect and document everything. He'll tell you about the processing of the scene. One person is assigned to take photographs. One person is assigned to scan the scene. And he was assigned with documenting the case scenes, the trajectory, where the blood was, and things like that. Agent Herrera is going to tell you that he collected 10 spent casings from the scene that day. He collected the mace, and he collected the AR-15 rifle. Agent Bogue, also the New Mexico State Police in the criminalistics portion, she was assigned with running what's called a Leica scanner, and it's a scanner that scans the whole room, and she uses the information from that scan to create a diagram. And she'll testify about the diagram that she created that documents where the body is, where the casings were, and the outline of the house. And you're finally going to hear from Jennifer Otto. She is the New Mexico Department of Public Safety DNA analyst. She's going to testify about the analysis of the evidence that was sent to her for review and whose DNA was on what. and what kind of DNA it was. And finally, you'll hear from Dr. Heather Gerald of the Office of Medical Investigator. She is the chief medical investigator there at UNM, and she conducted the autopsy of Guillermo Adiola. She's going to testify that Mr. Adiola had 2 gunshot wounds to his body. The first wound was to the head, and it entered at the right temple with a trajectory of right to left and downward. Dr. Gerald will testify that there was a second wound of the chest, and it entered at the supraclavicle region of the chest and exited the left side of the chest. As I stated, ladies and gentlemen, this is a case of reasonableness. A second-degree murder is a homicide committed without having been provoked, and a voluntary manslaughter is a homicide committed after having been sufficiently provoked. And the judge is going to give you the definition of what sufficient provocation is. Again, this case isn't about who did it or how it was done. The facts for you, ladies and gentlemen, are to decide whether this homicide was committed in self-defense or whether it was committed with or without sufficient provocation.
I understand that I understand the jury has reached a verdict. First of all, I need to know who the fourth person is. If you could state his or her name. And did the jury in fact reach a verdict? Can you hand the verdict forms to my bailiff? Mr. Cummings, please rise. The verdict read as follows. We find the defendant, Dean Cummings, not guilty of second-degree murder, is charged in count 1 of the grand jury indictment. Verdict number 2. We find the defendant, Dean Cummings, not guilty of voluntary manslaughter, a lesser crime of count 1 of the grand jury indictment. And Mr. Cummings, you've been found not guilty of these charges. You're exonerated of all conditions of the court. What I want to do right now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, is I need for you to follow my bailiff out this door, and I'll meet with you in courtroom C for a few minutes. Go out with her, follow her that way, not through that one.
Keep them there because I need to give them.
Okay. Counsel, what I'll do in the next few minutes is I'll prepare a release order, but I'll have him go back because he may have belongings in the like at the county jail. Okay, so I'll suggest just wait with him here in the courtroom until I get that paperwork done. All right? Yes. Okay. We'll be in recess.
Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.